He paid $5 for a farmhouse no one dared open for 40 years. What his dog uncovered changed everything forever. The wind cut across the Bitterroot Mountains as a worn pickup idled on the roadside, its engine barely holding together. Inside, a broken Navy SEAL and his loyal K9 had nowhere left to go until a letter offered a $5 farmhouse sealed for decades. What waited inside wasn't abandoned. It was hidden. Comment 1 or 0, and your location if you'd take that chance. The wind came down hard off the Bitterroot Mountains that night, cutting through steel and bone like it had something personal against the world. It rattled the loose panels of the old pickup truck, a hollow metallic shudder that echoed through the empty stretch of roadside. Snow had started to fall, not heavy, not yet, but enough to coat the ground in a thin, brittle layer that reflected the pale glow of the moon. Inside the truck, Caleb Walker didn't move. He lay slumped in the driver's seat, jacket pulled tight around his chest, one hand resting near the door handle even in sleep. It wasn't comfort, it was habit. Years of training had burned it into him. Always be ready. Always have an exit. Beside him, curled tightly but alert even in rest, was Titan. The German shepherd's ears twitched at every sound, the wind, the distant hum of a passing semi, the creak of freezing metal. His eyes opened before the truck even trembled. Then the headlights came. A truck roared past on the highway, too close, too fast. The sound slammed into Caleb's mind like a detonation. Gunfire. For a split second, the world inside his head shifted. Dust, heat, shouting, a man screaming his name. Caleb's eyes snapped open, his body jerking upright as his hand shot forward, grabbing at nothing, no weapon, no gear, just empty air. His breath came fast, uneven, like he had just surfaced from deep water. Titan was already moving. The dog pressed his body against Caleb's side, steady, grounding, no panic, no confusion, just presence. Caleb blinked hard, dragging himself back to the present. The cold glass, the cramped cab, the quiet road. No contact, he muttered under his breath, voice rough, distant. You're clear. Titan didn't move away. He stayed close, his weight firm against Caleb's leg, until the man's breathing slowed. It took a while. Caleb leaned back against the seat, staring out at the windshield where frost had begun to creep along the edges. His reflection stared back at him unshaven, hollow-eyed, older than 35, had any right to look. 6 months. 6 months since the discharge papers, since the evaluation, since the word unstable had followed him out of the only life he'd ever known. 6 months of drifting, truck stops, empty lots, gas stations that didn't ask questions. This rusted pickup was the closest thing he had to a home now. He reached into the passenger side floor, pulling up a small envelope that had been shoved between a blanket and a stack of worn maps. It had arrived that morning, forwarded from an address he barely used anymore. Official, plain, easy to ignore. He had almost thrown it away. Almost. Caleb turned it over in his hands again, the paper stiff from the cold. Titan lifted his head slightly, watching him, as if sensing something in the motion. You don't miss much, do you? Caleb said quietly. The dog's ears shifted forward. Caleb let out a slow breath and opened the envelope. The letter inside was brief. Legal. Cold in the way only official words could be. Property claim. Final heir. $5 filing fee. Abandoned farmhouse. 40 years. Location. Black Ridge Valley, Wyoming. He read it twice, then a third time, slower. The words didn't change. He let out a short, dry laugh, the sound barely filling the cab. $5, he said, shaking his head. That's what it's worth now. Titan shifted closer again, resting his chin lightly on Caleb's thigh. Caleb stared at the letter, but he wasn't seeing it anymore. He was seeing the alternative. Another night like this, another week, another winter, the slow erosion of something that had already been worn thin. He looked around the truck, the cracked dashboard, the condensation on the glass, the smell of old coffee and cold fabric. This wasn't living. It wasn't even surviving. It was waiting. Waiting for what? He didn't know. His fingers tightened slightly around the letter. A farmhouse, sealed for 40 years, somewhere no one else wanted. It sounded like a joke, or maybe a trap, or maybe, just maybe, something different. Titan lifted his head fully now, eyes locked on Caleb's face. Waiting. Caleb exhaled slowly, the breath fogging in the cold air. You think it's nothing? he asked quietly. Or, you think it's something? Titan didn't answer, of course, but he didn't look away either. Caleb glanced back down at the letter, then toward the dark road stretching ahead of them. Snow continued to fall, soft and steady now, covering the tracks behind them. No one was coming. No one was looking. For the first time in a long time, the choice was his. Stay here, or go. Caleb folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then he reached into the cup holder and counted what was left. A few bills. Some coins. Just enough. He let out another breath, longer this time, and reached for the keys. The engine turned over slowly, protesting the cold, then caught with a rough, uneven rumble. Titan shifted immediately, sitting upright now, alert, ready. Caleb adjusted his grip on the wheel, staring out into the darkness ahead. All right, he said, voice low but steady. Let's see what $5 gets us. He eased the truck onto the road, tires crunching over the thin layer of ice as they turned north. Behind them, the empty stretch of roadside disappeared into the falling snow. Ahead, the mountains waited, and somewhere beyond them, a house that had been sealed for 40 years, a place no one had come back to, until now. By the time the sun rose, it did little more than paint the sky a pale gray behind thick clouds. The light barely reached the narrow highway. Caleb followed north, swallowed by long stretches of forest and mountain shadow. The world felt quieter out here, too quiet. Not peaceful. Just empty. The truck's engine hummed steadily, but inside the cab, there was no music, no radio chatter, just the sound of tires against frozen pavement and Titan's slow, measured breathing. Caleb hadn't said much since they left. He drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead, as if looking away for even a second might make the road disappear. The letter sat folded in the center console, like something fragile or dangerous he hadn't decided which. They passed through the last real town just after sunrise. A gas station, a diner with a flickering sign, a handful of houses pressed close together as if trying to hold on to warmth. Caleb stopped long enough to fill the tank and grab a black coffee that tasted burnt but hot. No one asked him where he was headed. No one cared. That suited him fine. As they pulled back onto the road, Titan shifted in his seat, not restless, focused. His ears angled forward, his body leaning slightly toward the windshield. Caleb noticed. What is it? He asked, glancing over. Titan didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stared ahead, unmoving. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing but trees, endless lines of pine stretching up the hills, their branches heavy with snow. The road narrowed, the pavement giving way to rougher patches, then to gravel in places where the state had stopped caring. Caleb felt it too then. Not fear. Not yet, but something close to it. A sense that the further they drove, the less the world behind them mattered. Like crossing a line you couldn't uncross. The GPS signal faded an hour later. Caleb glanced at the screen, watching the map freeze, then vanish entirely. No signal, he muttered. Titan's ears twitched. Caleb reached over, tapping the screen once, then turning it off. He didn't need it anymore. The directions were simple enough. North, then east at the old logging road, then keep going until there was nothing left. He drove in silence for another mile before the highway gave way completely. The turnoff wasn't marked, just a break in the tree line where the ground dipped slightly. The snow thinner where tires had passed, maybe weeks ago, or longer. Caleb slowed the truck, studying it. This has to be it, he said. Titan didn't relax. If anything, he became more alert. Caleb eased the truck onto the dirt path. The tires crunched over frozen mud and scattered rock, the suspension groaning as the road immediately grew uneven. Branches scraped along the sides of the truck with a high, dry screech. The trees closed in around them, tall, dense, leaning inward as if watching. The sky disappeared behind interlocking branches, turning the daylight into something dim and filtered. Shadows stretched longer than they should have, shifting with the movement of the truck. Caleb slowed even more. This wasn't a road anymore. It was a memory of one. He tightened his grip on the wheel. You feel that? He asked quietly. Titan didn't take his eyes off the path ahead. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind. Just the truck, moving through something that didn't seem to want it there. Then, suddenly, the trees broke. The road opened into a clearing, wide and silent under a thin blanket of snow. And there it was, the farmhouse. It stood at the far edge of the clearing, angled slightly, as if it had settled unevenly over the years. The paint, What little remained had faded into a dull gray, the wood beneath exposed like bone. The windows were boarded shut, each one sealed tight, weathered planks nailed across them from the outside. The porch sagged on one side, its support beams warped and cracked. A section of the railing had collapsed entirely, half buried in snow. Behind the house, rows of orchard trees stretched into the distance. Or what used to be trees. Now they were twisted, lifeless shapes, branches clawing at the sky. Dead. All of it. Caleb didn't move. The engine idled softly as he stared. "This is it," he said, though it came out more like a question. Titan stood up slowly, his paws pressing against the seat as he leaned forward. A low sound rumbled in his chest. Not loud, but unmistakable. Caleb turned his head, watching the dog. "You don't like it." Titan's gaze never left the house. Caleb followed it again, letting his eyes trace every detail. The boards on the windows weren't broken. They weren't loose. They were deliberate. Sealed. Kept that way. For 40 years. The wind picked up slightly, brushing through the dead orchard behind the house. The branches shifted, producing a dry, brittle sound, like something whispering just out of reach. Caleb felt it then. That same feeling from the road, only stronger now. This place wasn't just abandoned. It had been left behind. On purpose. He reached down and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. No hum. No movement. Just stillness. Titan jumped down first, landing softly in the snow. He didn't wander, didn't explore. He stood beside the truck, body tense, eyes fixed on the house. Waiting. Caleb opened the door slowly and stepped out. The cold hit him harder here, sharper somehow, as if the air itself had weight. He pulled his jacket tighter but didn't take his eyes off the farmhouse. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Man and dog. Facing something neither fully understood. Caleb took a step forward. The snow crunched under his boots, loud in the silence. Titan moved with him immediately, close at his side. "All right," Caleb said quietly, more to himself than anything else. "We came this far." He started toward the house. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not because of the snow, because of the feeling that he wasn't just walking into a place. He was stepping into something unfinished, and whatever had been left behind here was still waiting. Caleb stopped a few feet from the porch. Up close, the farmhouse looked worse. The wood wasn't just weathered, it was split, warped, and hollowed in places where years of cold and heat had taken their toll. The front steps dipped slightly under the weight of time, one corner sagging lower than the rest. Snow had gathered in the cracks, melting just enough to refreeze into thin sheets of ice. Titan didn't step onto the porch. He stayed at the edge, muscles tight, head low, eyes fixed on the door. Caleb glanced down at him. "You staying there?" he asked quietly. Titan didn't move. Caleb let out a slow breath and stepped forward alone. The first step creaked under his weight. The second groaned louder, a deep wooden complaint that echoed through the stillness. By the time he reached the top, the sound had already faded back into silence. He stood in front of the door. It was solid, heavy, darkened with age and streaked from years of exposure. The handle was dull metal, coated in a thin film of rust. But what caught his attention wasn't the decay. It was the boards. The windows on either side of the door were sealed, tight planks nailed across them from the outside, weathered but still firm. Whoever had sealed this house hadn't rushed it. They had meant to keep it closed. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out the old key that had come with the paperwork. It felt heavier than it should have. Cold. He held it for a moment, turning it in his fingers, studying the worn edges. "This better work," he muttered. Behind him, Titan shifted slightly but didn't come closer. Caleb slid the key into the lock. It didn't go in smoothly. Rust resisted it, grinding softly as the metal forced its way into place. Caleb adjusted his grip and pushed harder, feeling the mechanism give just enough to accept it. Then he turned. At first, nothing happened. Then, a sharp, metallic crack. The sound split through the clearing like a gunshot. Caleb froze. Titan's head snapped up instantly, body rigid, ears forward. The lock turned slowly, protesting every inch, until it gave way with a long, drawn-out groan. Caleb swallowed. "That's a good sign," he said under his breath, though it didn't feel like one. He wrapped his hand around the handle and pushed. The door didn't move. Swollen shut, he tried again, harder this time. The wood held firm, as if it had fused to the frame. Caleb stepped back slightly, bracing himself. "All right," he said quietly. Then he drove his shoulder into it. The impact sent a dull thud through the structure, followed by a faint crack somewhere deep in the wood. Dust shook loose from the frame, drifting down in a thin cloud. The door still didn't open. Titan let out a low, warning growl. Caleb ignored it. He stepped back again, breath steady, eyes locked on the door. One more time, he slammed into it with everything he had. This time, something gave. A sharp, splintering sound cut through the air as the frame cracked just enough to break the seal. The door jerked inward an inch, then stuck again. Cold air rushed out from the gap. Not fresh air, old air. Stale, thick, carrying a scent that hadn't touched the outside world in decades. Dust, wood rot, and something faint beneath it. Something almost sweet, like dried leaves or forgotten flowers. Caleb hesitated. Titan's growl deepened. "Easy," Caleb said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or himself. He gripped the edge of the door and pulled. The wood resisted, then slowly dragged open with a long, scraping groan that echoed into the darkness beyond. The sound didn't stop right away. It carried, as if the house itself was reacting. Caleb stepped back instinctively, heart beating faster now, not from effort, but from something else. The doorway stood open, black, still, waiting. He didn't step inside immediately. Instead, he stood there, staring into the dark, trying to adjust, trying to listen. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just silence so complete it pressed against his ears. Titan stepped forward then, finally moving onto the porch. But he didn't cross the threshold. He stopped just short of it. Body angled slightly, nose twitching as he tested the air. Caleb noticed. "You smell something?" Titan's ears flicked once, but he didn't move. Caleb exhaled slowly and reached into his jacket again, pulling out a small flashlight. He clicked it on, the beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness inside. Dust filled the air immediately, swirling in the light like tiny drifting particles. The beam landed on the floor first. Old wood, scattered debris, a thin layer of dirt that had settled evenly over everything. Undisturbed, Caleb lifted the light higher. Shapes began to form. A couch, 2 chairs, a table, all still in place, covered in gray. Further in, something on the wall caught the edge of the beam. Maps, large pinned maps, their edges curled with age. And beneath them, metal, gear, military. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. This wasn't just a farmhouse, he said quietly. Titan stepped closer, just enough that his front paws crossed the threshold. Then he stopped again, still tracking, not exploring. That was wrong. Caleb knew it. Titan had been through buildings before, clearing rooms, checking corners, moving fast and controlled. This wasn't that. This was slower. Focused, like he was following something specific. Caleb shifted his grip on the flashlight. "All right," he said under his breath. Then he stepped inside. The floor creaked under his weight, the sound echoing softly through the empty space. The air felt colder here, heavier somehow, as if it hadn't moved in years. Titan followed but stayed close. Closer than usual. Caleb swept the light across the room. Furniture frozen in place. A layer of dust thick enough to leave clear marks where anything disturbed it. Cobwebs stretched between beams and corners, catching the light in thin strands. Nothing looked touched. Nothing looked changed. And yet, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling. He moved further in, boots crunching lightly over grit and debris. The beam of the flashlight shifted again, catching something near the far wall. A jacket, hanging from a hook, dark green, military issue, not rotted, not torn, just waiting. Caleb stepped closer, the light steady now. The fabric stirred slightly in the cold air from the open door. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like someone had just stepped out of it. Caleb stopped. His grip tightened on the flashlight. Behind him, Titan let out a low, controlled growl. Not loud, but enough. Caleb turned his head slightly, listening. Still nothing. No footsteps, no voices. Just that same heavy silence. But now, it felt different. Not empty, not abandoned. Watched. Caleb exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay grounded. "It's just a house," he said quietly. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Because something about this place wasn't done yet. Caleb stood in the center of the living room, the beam of his flashlight drifting slowly across the walls, the furniture, the silent shapes that hadn't moved in 4 decades. Nothing shifted. Nothing breathed. And yet, the feeling stayed. Titan pressed closer to his leg, not out of fear but awareness, the kind that came from training, from instinct sharpened by things most people never saw. Caleb lowered the flashlight slightly. "Clear," he whispered. But the word felt hollow. He moved deeper into the room, boots crunching lightly over dust and debris. Every step stirred particles into the air, catching the light like ash, floating in slow motion. The maps on the wall drew him in. He stepped closer. They weren't decorative. They were operational. Topographic lines, survey markings, notes scribbled in tight handwriting along the edges. Several were layered over each other, pinned in a way that suggested they had been studied, revised, reconsidered. Caleb leaned in. Military precision. Not casual. Not random. He reached out, brushing a finger lightly along one of the edges. The paper was brittle but intact. "Someone worked this," he murmured. Titan shifted slightly behind him. Caleb turned. The dog had moved away from the doorway now, but only just. His nose hovered inches above the floor, tracing something invisible, slow and deliberate. Tracking, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no scent Caleb could detect. Still, Titan followed it. Caleb watched him for a moment, unease creeping back into his chest. "You're picking up something I can't," he said quietly. Titan didn't look up. Caleb turned back to the room, scanning again. The couch, the chairs, the table, everything covered in dust but not disturbed. He moved toward the fireplace. Stone, solid, built to last. The hearth was filled with old ash, untouched, cold for decades. Above it, a mantel held a few scattered items, an old clock, stopped at some forgotten hour, and a photograph frame turned slightly away. Caleb picked it up. The glass was clouded, but the image beneath still showed through. A man, mid-40s maybe, clean-cut, serious expression, the kind of face that didn't smile easily but meant it when it did. Beside him a woman, warm eyes, calm. Caleb stared at the man a moment longer. Something about him felt familiar. Not in memory, in presence. Like recognizing a posture, a stance, the way someone held themselves. Military. Caleb set the frame back down carefully. Behind him, Titan let out a short, sharp breath. Not a bark. A reaction. Caleb turned instantly. "What is it?" Titan had stopped moving. His body was still, ears forward, eyes fixed not on the door, not on the windows, on Caleb. For a second, neither moved. Then Titan shifted his gaze slightly, past Caleb, toward the far side of the room. Caleb turned slowly. The flashlight followed. The beam landed on the staircase. It rose along the right wall, disappearing into darkness above. The railing was intact, though worn. The steps held a thin layer of dust, undisturbed. Nothing moved, but the air felt different there. Heavier, colder. Caleb stared at it for a long moment. Then he shook his head slightly. "Not yet," he said under his breath. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, he moved toward the kitchen. The doorway creaked softly as he passed through. The space beyond was smaller, tighter. Cabinets lined the walls, their surfaces coated in the same gray film as everything else. An old sink sat beneath a window boarded from the outside, letting in only faint slivers of light through the cracks. Caleb stepped inside. The floor here felt different. More stable, less hollow. He swept the flashlight across the counters. Old dishes, a kettle, a chair pulled slightly away from the table, as if someone had just stood up and never returned. Caleb stopped. That thought hit harder than it should have. He took a slow breath. "Get a grip," he muttered. But it wasn't that simple. Because the longer he stood there, the more it felt like the house wasn't empty, just paused, like a story that had been interrupted mid-sentence. Behind him, Titan entered the kitchen quietly. He moved differently now, closer, tighter. He brushed against Caleb's leg once, grounding him. Caleb looked down. "Yeah," he said softly. "I feel it too." He leaned back against the counter, letting the flashlight drop slightly as his mind drifted. And just like that, he wasn't in the kitchen anymore. He was back there. Heat, sand, the sharp crack of gunfire tearing through the air. "Walker, move." The voice came from somewhere behind him. Then the explosion. Too close, too fast. The ground lifting beneath him. And then, silence. Caleb's eyes snapped open. He was back in the kitchen. Cold, still. His hand was gripping the edge of the counter so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Titan was pressed firmly against him now, steady, unmoving. Caleb forced himself to breathe. In, out, slow, controlled. Not here, he whispered. Not now. The memory faded, but the weight of it stayed. He straightened slowly, running a hand over his face. This place, he said quietly. It's messing with my head. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The house wasn't creating anything. It was pulling it out. The silence, the stillness. It gave his mind room to wander where it usually didn't have time to go. And what lived there wasn't quiet. Caleb pushed himself off the counter. All right, he said, voice steadier now. We clear the ground floor first. Titan stepped back slightly, giving him space, but staying close. Caleb moved back into the living room, sweeping the flashlight once more across the space. Nothing had changed. Nothing moved. And yet, that feeling remained, unfinished, waiting. He glanced once more toward the staircase. The darkness above seemed thicker now, more present, like it knew he'd noticed. Caleb held the beam there for a long moment, then lowered it. Tomorrow, he said quietly. For now, this was enough, because whatever had been left behind in this house wasn't just in the walls, it was in him. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't running from it. The fire came later. It took Caleb nearly an hour to get it going. The wood he found stacked behind the house was dry but brittle, like it had been waiting too long to be used. He cleared out the old ash from the fireplace, built a small structure of kindling, and struck a flame. At first, nothing. Then a flicker. Then heat. The light pushed back the darkness just enough to give the room shape again. Shadows danced along the walls, shifting over the maps, the furniture, the empty spaces where life used to exist. Caleb sat on the floor with his back against the wall, one knee up, one arm resting across it. Titan lay close beside him, but not fully relaxed. His head was up, ears alert, eyes moving not randomly, but with purpose. Watching, always watching. You ever get tired? Caleb asked quietly, staring into the fire. Titan didn't respond. Didn't need to. Caleb let out a faint breath through his nose. Yeah, he muttered. Me neither. The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the house now. Outside, the wind had died down completely. No branches scraping, no distant engines, just silence. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. Something about the stillness felt wrong, like it wasn't natural. Like it had settled here and refused to leave. Caleb shifted slightly, adjusting his position. That's when Titan moved. Fast. The dog's body snapped upright, ears forward, eyes locked on a point across the room. A low growl built in his chest. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Caleb straightened immediately. What is it? Titan didn't look at him. He stepped forward slowly, deliberate, each movement controlled, toward the fireplace, but not the fire. To the right of it, a section of wall Caleb hadn't paid much attention to before. Titan stopped there, nose inches from the wood. Then he scratched. Once, twice, harder the third time. The sound echoed in the room, wood against claw. Caleb stood up slowly, grabbing the flashlight without taking his eyes off the dog. You smell something? Titan scratched again. More aggressive now. Focused. Not random. Caleb moved closer. The beam of the flashlight cut across the wall, illuminating faded paneling, cracked from age. At first glance, nothing stood out. But Titan didn't move. Caleb crouched down, bringing the light closer. All right, he said quietly. Show me. He ran his hand along the paneling. The surface felt uneven, old, worn but one section. One section shifted slightly under pressure. Caleb paused. He pressed again. The wood gave just a fraction. Not loose, but not solid either. He leaned in, examining the edges. There. A faint seam, almost invisible unless you knew to look. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. That's not original, he murmured. Titan's growl softened, but his focus didn't. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out a small multi-tool, flipping it open. He slid the edge into the seam and applied pressure. The panel resisted, then shifted. A soft cracking sound followed as the wood separated from its frame, just enough to create a gap. Cold air slipped through, different from the rest of the house. Still cold but contained. Caleb froze. Titan stepped back half a pace, then leaned forward again, nose twitching. Caleb widened the gap slowly, prying the panel loose, It came free with a sharp snap. Dust fell, and behind it, darkness. Not just the hollow of a wall, deeper. A space. Caleb angled the flashlight inside. The beam revealed something metallic, rectangular, solid. A case. Old. Military. Caleb's breath slowed. "Well," he said quietly, "that's something." He reached in carefully, fingers brushing against cold steel. The object was heavier than it looked. He adjusted his grip and pulled. The case slid free with a dull scrape. It landed in his hands with weight, real weight, not empty. Titan stepped closer, sniffing it briefly, then pulling back again. Caleb set the case down near the fire. It was an old ammunition container, sealed tight, the metal worn but intact. The latch was rusted, but not enough to make it impossible to open. He didn't touch it yet. Instead, he looked back at the wall. Something caught his eye. Near the lower edge of the opening, marks. Small, faint, but fresh. Not covered in the same thick layer of dust as everything else. Caleb leaned closer, ran his fingers over them. The wood felt cleaner there. Disturbed. Recently. His expression hardened. "Someone's been here," he said quietly. Titan's ears snapped forward again. The room felt different now. Not just heavy. Occupied. Caleb stood slowly, scanning the space around him. The windows. Still boarded. The door. Still closed. No sound. No movement. But the evidence was there. Clear. Undeniable. He turned back to the case. His hand hovered over the latch. Then, Titan moved again. Faster this time. He spun toward the door, body rigid, a deep, low growl rolling through his chest. Caleb didn't hesitate. He grabbed the flashlight and moved to the side, positioning himself instinctively. Angle, cover, line of sight. The house went silent again. Completely silent. Then, footsteps. Faint. Outside. Just beyond the porch. Caleb's pulse slowed, focused. Every sense locked in. Titan stood between him and the door now, unmoving, ready. The footsteps stopped, right outside, close enough that Caleb could hear the subtle shift of weight on wood. Then, nothing. No knock. No voice. Just presence. Waiting. Caleb didn't move. Didn't speak. He let the silence stretch. Seconds. Maybe longer. Then, the steps retreated. Slow at first, then fading. Gone. Caleb held position a moment longer, before finally exhaling. Titan didn't relax. Not yet. Caleb lowered the flashlight slightly, eyes still fixed on the door. "They know this place," he said quietly. Titan let out a low breath. Caleb turned back toward the fire, toward the case. And the open wall behind it. Whatever this was, it wasn't abandoned. It had been hidden, protected, and now, found. The fire snapped softly, sending a brief flare of light across the metal case at Caleb's feet. For a long moment, he didn't touch it. The house had changed, not in shape or sound, but in meaning. Before, it had felt abandoned. Now it felt interrupted. Caleb crouched slowly, his eyes flicking once more toward the front door. Titan stood near it, body angled, listening, not relaxed, but no longer growling. Watching, guarding. Caleb placed his hand on the lid of the case. Cold, solid, real. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see what you were hiding." The latch resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse. Caleb adjusted his grip and used the edge of the multi-tool to pry it upward. A sharp metallic click broke the silence. Titan's ears flicked, but he didn't move. Caleb lifted the lid. Inside, not emptiness, not decay, but order. Everything inside had been sealed carefully, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture and time. Caleb peeled back the top layer. The first thing he saw was money. Stacks of it, old bills, bound with rubber bands that had dried and cracked but still held. The edges were slightly worn, but the bundles were intact. Caleb blinked once. Then again. "That's not nothing," he muttered. But the money wasn't what held his attention. It was what lay beneath. He reached in and pulled out a folder. Thick, heavy, military-grade paper. He opened it carefully. Inside were documents typed, stamped, marked with classifications that hadn't faded with time. Coordinates, survey reports, operational notes. His expression shifted. "This isn't civilian," he said quietly. Titan moved closer now, standing beside him. Caleb flipped through the pages. Certain words stood out. Acquisition. Territory. Transfer. And one name. Repeated. Northridge. Caleb froze. He leaned closer to the page, scanning more carefully. The documents outlined something bigger than land ownership. They described systematic control properties acquired under pressure, boundaries redrawn, records altered, not random, coordinated. Caleb sat back slightly. This place, he murmured. It wasn't just land. He reached deeper into the case. His fingers brushed against something else. Plastic. Smooth. He pulled it out. Cassette tapes. Several of them, labeled by hand. Dates. Notes. One of them stood out immediately. Final record. Caleb stared at it for a second, then set it aside. Not yet. He wasn't ready for that. Instead, he went back to the documents. At the bottom of the stack, he found something heavier. A sealed envelope. He opened it carefully. Inside, a photograph. The same man from the frame above the fireplace, but younger, in uniform. Military intelligence insignia visible on his shoulder. Caleb's jaw tightened. Daniel Mercer, he said quietly, reading the name printed on the back. Titan shifted beside him. Caleb exhaled slowly. Yeah, that fits. He looked around the room again. The maps, the gear, the structure of it all. This hadn't been a home. Not just a home, it had been a base, a place to work, to watch, to record. Caleb set the photo down carefully, then glanced back toward the open wall. Something didn't sit right. He stood slowly and moved back to it. The flashlight beam cut into the hollow space again. The case had been sitting toward the front, too easy to find, too obvious. If someone had hidden something this carefully, there was more. Titan followed immediately, stepping closer. Caleb leaned in, reaching deeper this time. His fingers brushed against the back of the cavity. Wood. Then, a gap. Small. Hidden. He shifted his angle, pushing further. His hand slid into a second compartment. Smaller. Tighter. His fingers closed around something thin. Flat. He pulled it out. Another tape. Different from the others. No label. No markings. Just blank. Caleb stared at it. Then back at the case. That's the one, he said quietly. Titan's ears flicked again. Caleb didn't know how he knew. But he did. This was what had been hidden deeper. Protected. More than the rest. He stood there for a moment, holding it, then turned slowly. The room felt different now. Not just heavy. Focused. Like everything in it had been leading to this point. Caleb placed the tape carefully beside the others, then sat back down near the fire. The flames had settled into a steady burn, casting long shadows across the room. Titan lay beside him again, but closer now, his body angled toward Caleb, eyes still alert. Caleb picked up the labeled tape first. Not the final one. Not yet. He needed context. He needed to understand what he was stepping into. He looked around the room once more. The house. The silence. The evidence in front of him. Then he exhaled slowly. All right, he said. You left this for a reason. His hand hovered over the tape player sitting near the wall, old, but intact. He reached for it, paused, then looked down at Titan. You ready? Titan didn't move, but he didn't look away either. Caleb gave a faint nod, then pressed play. The machine whirred softly as the tape engaged. For a second, nothing. Then, a voice. Calm, measured, controlled. My name is Daniel Mercer. If you're hearing this, then the house has been opened. Caleb's chest tightened slightly. The fire crackled behind him. Titan remained still, and the voice continued. Not from the past, but from something that had been waiting for someone like him. The tape hissed softly before the voice returned. Steady, controlled. A man used to choosing his words carefully. I don't know who you are, Daniel Mercer said, but if you found this, then you've already stepped into something most people would walk away from. Caleb didn't move. The fire crackled behind him, casting shifting light across the walls. Titan lay close, his head lifted now, listening not to the words, but to the tone. 40 years ago, Mercer continued, I was assigned to survey land acquisitions tied to private defense contractors. On paper, it was routine. Boundaries, ownership, transfer of assets. A pause. It wasn't routine. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, the tape player between them. They weren't buying land, Mercer said. They were taking it, quietly, legally, on the surface. But behind that pressure, threats, records rewritten, People pushed out. The fire popped sharply, sending a brief flare of light upward. Caleb didn't react. He was locked in now. I documented everything, Mercer continued. Every irregularity, every name, every transaction that didn't add up. I thought I was building a case. Another pause. Longer this time. I was wrong. Titan shifted slightly beside Caleb, his ears flicking once. They found out, Mercer said, voice quieter now. Not immediately, but eventually. And when they did, they didn't come after the evidence. Caleb's jaw tightened. They came after my family. The words settled heavy in the room. Caleb exhaled slowly. He understood that. Too well. I had a choice, Mercer went on. Turn it over. Walk away. Pretend I hadn't seen anything. Or keep going and risk everything. The tape crackled softly. I chose wrong. Caleb shook his head slightly. No, he muttered under his breath. You didn't. The voice continued. They made it clear. I wasn't the target anymore. My wife, my son. That was the leverage. Titan let out a quiet breath. Caleb's grip tightened on his knee. So I did the only thing I could, Mercer said. I disappeared. The room felt colder somehow. Caleb glanced briefly toward the boarded windows. Still sealed. Still silent. I staged it, Mercer explained. Left enough behind to make it look real. Abandonment. Failure. Cowardice. Whatever story they needed to believe. A faint shift in his tone. It worked. Caleb swallowed. They stopped looking for me, Mercer said. Which meant they stopped looking for them. The fire settled again, its light softer now. I left everything here, Mercer continued. The documents. The money. The proof. Not because I thought someone would find it. A pause. But because I hoped someone would understand it. Caleb's eyes dropped to the case beside him. The stacks. The files. The tape. You don't need to fight them, Mercer said. Not if you can walk away. That was never the point. Caleb frowned slightly. That land. Mercer went on. It's not valuable because of what's on it. It's valuable because of what it connects to. Another pause. If you stay, they'll come. Titan's ears shifted again. Caleb didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He already knew. I couldn't stop them, Mercer said. But I slowed them. I made them careful. Quiet. His voice softened. That was enough. The tape crackled. Then, I don't know if I made the right call, Mercer admitted. But I know this. If you're hearing this, then you already understand something most people don't. Caleb leaned back slightly. What? He whispered. The answer came quietly. Some things are worth standing your ground for. The tape went silent for a moment. Just the soft hiss of empty recording. Caleb waited. Then, a final line. If you choose to walk away, oh men, we'll blame you. A pause. But if you stay, the tape crackled once more. Then finish it. Click. The machine stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Heavy. Caleb sat there, unmoving. The fire burned low behind him, shadows stretching longer now across the walls. Titan rested his head slowly against Caleb's leg. Not alert. Not tense. Just there. Caleb stared at the tape. His mind wasn't racing. It was still, processing, pieces falling into place. The house, the maps, the hidden case, the footsteps outside. They're still here, he said quietly. Not a question, a fact. Titan didn't move. Caleb leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees again. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, a memory surfaced. Not the battlefield, not the chaos, but the moment after, when everything went quiet, when the decisions were already made, and all that was left was what came next. Caleb looked down at his hands. Steady now. For the first time, in a long time. This wasn't meant for just anyone, he said softly. Titan lifted his head slightly. Caleb glanced at him. No, he added. It was meant for someone who wouldn't run. The words settled between them. The fire cracked once more. Outside, the wind stirred faintly through the dead orchard. Caleb reached for the second tape, the one without a label. He held it for a moment, then set it back down. Not yet. Because now, he understood something. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a decision. And the house, the land, The truth buried in it wasn't waiting to be found anymore. It was waiting to be chosen. Morning came slowly. The kind of gray light that didn't warm anything just revealed it. Caleb stood on the porch, a cup of black coffee in his hand, watching the valley wake up. Frost clung to the dead orchard, each branch outlined in pale white. The mountains beyond were quiet, distant, unmoved by whatever had been uncovered in the house behind him. Titan stood beside him, scanning the tree line. He hadn't relaxed all night. Neither had Caleb. The fire inside had burned low sometime before dawn. Caleb had slept in short intervals, never fully drifting off. Every sound, the shift of wood, the whisper of wind, had kept him just close enough to awareness. Not fear. Preparation. He took a slow sip of coffee. Cold already. He didn't mind. Still here, he said quietly, almost to himself. Titan's ears flicked. Caleb stepped down off the porch, boots crunching softly in the frozen ground. He walked a slow circle around the house, eyes scanning everything with a different kind of attention now. Not curiosity. Assessment. Tracks. That's what he was looking for. He found them near the edge of the clearing. Faint, partially covered by the night's frost, but still visible if you knew how to read them. Boot prints. Not his. Not old. Caleb crouched, running a gloved hand just above the surface without touching. Recent. Within hours, he followed them with his eyes. They led toward the tree line, then disappeared. Titan stood a few feet away, nose low, tracing the same path. His movements were precise, controlled, every step deliberate. They didn't come close, Caleb said quietly. Titan paused, then looked back at him. Caleb nodded once. Yeah, they didn't need to. He stood slowly. They had seen enough. They knew the house had been opened. That was all they needed. The sound came just before noon. Not loud, but unmistakable. An engine. Caleb was inside, clearing debris from the living room floor when Titan's head snapped toward the window. Alert. Focused. Caleb straightened immediately. He moved toward the front of the house, keeping low, using the wall for cover out of habit more than necessity. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped. Right outside. Caleb stepped onto the porch again, Titan at his side. A black SUV sat at the edge of the clearing. Clean. Out of place. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong in a place like this. The driver's door opened slowly. A woman stepped out. Mid-40s maybe. Sharp posture. Clean lines. Everything about her was controlled. Her movement, her expression, even the way she closed the door behind her. She didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. She walked toward the house like she already knew it. Caleb didn't move. Titan shifted slightly forward, positioning himself just ahead of Caleb's leg. The woman stopped a few feet from the base of the porch, close enough to speak, far enough to observe. "Mr. Walker," she said. Her voice was calm, measured. Like the one on the tape, Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't remember introducing myself," he replied. A faint smile touched her lips. "You didn't need to." She let that sit for a moment, then extended a hand though she didn't step closer. "Evelyn Cross," she said. "Northridge Holdings." The name landed exactly the way Caleb expected it to. Heavy. Confirmed. He didn't take her hand. "Figured," he said. Evelyn lowered her hand without offense. "I imagine you've already found something inside," she continued, "given how quickly you moved on the claim." Caleb didn't answer. Titan didn't take his eyes off her. Evelyn noticed. "Impressive dog," she said, glancing briefly at Titan. "Military trained." Caleb's voice hardened slightly. "He's not the one you should be worried about." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "I'm not here to cause problems," she said calmly. "Quite the opposite." She reached into her coat and pulled out a thin folder. "Your situation is complicated," she went on. "This property comes with obligations. Legal, financial, structural. Most people in your position wouldn't last a month out here." Caleb crossed his arms slightly. "Then I guess I'm not most people." Evelyn gave a small nod. "No," she said. "You're not." She opened the folder and held it out, not offering it directly, just presenting it. "Buyout," she said. "Immediate, clean, more than fair." Caleb didn't move. "You walk away," she continued. "No debt, no burden. A fresh start somewhere that doesn't come with history." Titan let out a low, quiet growl. Evelyn's eyes flicked to him again, then back to Caleb. "This place," she said softly, "isn't worth what you think it is." Caleb stepped down off the porch now, closing the distance by a few feet. Funny, he said. That's not what the paperwork says. Evelyn's smile returned smaller this time. Paperwork can be misleading. Caleb stopped just short of her, close enough now to see the details, her eyes, steady and calculating, the slight tension in her jaw she hadn't shown before. You knew it was sealed, he said. 40 years. Evelyn didn't deny it. We monitor properties of interest, she replied simply. Interest, Caleb repeated. He let the word hang, then shook his head slightly. Not interested, he said. Evelyn didn't react immediately. She closed the folder slowly. I think you misunderstand, she said. This isn't an opportunity you want to refuse. Caleb met her gaze evenly. No, he said. I understand it just fine. A pause. The air shifted. Evelyn took a small step back, not retreating, just adjusting. Mr. Walker, she said, voice still calm but colder now. You don't know what you've stepped into. Caleb's expression didn't change. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. Titan moved slightly, placing himself more directly between them now. Evelyn noticed, and this time, her smile disappeared completely. Then you should also know, she continued, that staying here won't be simple. Caleb shrugged lightly. Nothing ever is. Another pause. Longer. He could see it now, the shift behind her eyes. Not anger, not frustration, calculation. She studied him, measured him, then gave a small, almost respectful nod. Very well, she said. She turned and walked back toward the SUV without another word. The engine started moments later. The vehicle reversed slowly, then turned, disappearing back down the narrow path through the trees. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence. Caleb stood there a moment longer, watching the empty space where the SUV had been. Then he exhaled slowly. They're not asking, he said. Titan looked up at him. Caleb nodded once. They're warning. He turned back toward the house. The porch creaked as he stepped up again. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers. The case still sat where he had left it. The tapes, the documents, the truth, all still there, waiting. Caleb stepped inside. This time, there was no hesitation, because now he knew he wasn't supposed to stay, which meant he wasn't supposed to leave either. The sun dropped early behind the mountains, taking what little warmth it had with it. By dusk, the clearing was already sinking back into shadow, the farmhouse standing quiet and watchful against the darkening sky. Inside, Caleb moved with purpose. No hesitation now. He reinforced the front door first, wedging a thick plank across the handle, securing it into the frame. The windows were already boarded, but he checked each one anyway, testing the wood, the nails, the weak points. Old instincts. Still sharp, Titan followed him through every room, step for step, never drifting far. His posture had changed again, not tense, not uneasy. Focused. Ready. Caleb returned to the living room, glancing once at the case and the scattered documents. He gathered them carefully, stacking everything neatly and placing it deeper inside the wall cavity before sliding the panel back into place. Not perfect, but hidden enough. He stood there a moment, staring at it. They're coming back, he said quietly. Titan's ears flicked. Caleb nodded once. Yeah, I know. The fire burned low again, casting a dim orange glow across the room. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing through the dead orchard with a dry, whispering sound. Caleb sat down briefly, back against the wall, eyes on the door, waiting. He didn't know when, but he knew. The night stretched. Hours passed. Nothing. Just the steady rhythm of the fire and the distant movement of wind. Then, Titan moved. No warning. No growl. Just a sudden shift, his body rising, head snapping toward the back of the house. Caleb was already moving. He stood in one motion, grabbing the flashlight, killing it before the beam could give away his position. Silence. Total. Then, a sound. Soft. Deliberate. Not the wind. Footsteps. Not at the front. At the back. Caleb's breathing slowed instantly. Controlled. Measured. He moved along the wall, keeping low, every step placed carefully to avoid noise. Titan stayed just ahead of him, tracking, adjusting. The footsteps stopped. Then, a faint scrape. Wood. Testing. Someone was checking the rear entry. Caleb reached the kitchen doorway and paused, listening. Another scrape. Closer. The back door. The old hinges creaked slightly under pressure. Caleb positioned himself beside the frame, body angled, ready. Titan crouched low, muscles tight. The door shifted. Just slightly. A crack. Cold air slipped through. Then, a hand. Gloved. Pushing. Caleb waited. Didn't move. Didn't rush. The door opened another inch. Then another. Enough. The moment stretched. Then, Titan moved. Fast. Explosive. He launched forward with a force that broke the silence like a gunshot, his body slamming into the intruder before they could react. A sharp shout cut through the dark. Caleb stepped in immediately, grabbing the door and pulling it wide, using the movement to disorient the second figure just outside. Two of them, maybe more beyond. The first stumbled back under Titan's weight, trying to regain footing. The second hesitated just long enough. Caleb used it. He drove forward, pushing the door fully open, forcing space, forcing movement. "Back off," he shouted. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried weight, authority. The second figure raised their hands slightly, not surrender, but pause. The first struggled beneath Titan, trying to push him away. Titan didn't let go. A sharp, controlled bite enough to disable, not destroy. The man cried out again. "Call him off!" the second shouted. Caleb didn't move. "Tell them to leave," he said, voice steady. The second figure hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Back, back," they called out into the dark. A third shape shifted further out, barely visible in the shadows. Then, movement, retreat, fast. The second figure stepped back as well, pulling the injured one with them. Titan held for one more second, then released. He stepped back instantly, returning to Caleb's side, alert, ready for another command. The figures disappeared into the trees. The sound of retreating footsteps faded quickly. Then, silence again, but not the same silence. Not empty, earned. Caleb stood there, breathing steady, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the doorway. Titan remained beside him, body still, watching, waiting. A long moment passed. Then Caleb stepped forward, closing the door slowly. He secured it again, reinforced, then turned. Titan limped, just slightly. Caleb noticed immediately. "Hey," he said, crouching down. Titan didn't resist, as Caleb checked him. A shallow cut along the shoulder. Not deep, but enough. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You took that for me," he muttered. Titan's eyes stayed on him, calm, unshaken. Caleb exhaled slowly, running a hand gently along the dog's neck. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I know." He stood again, looking toward the wall where the case was hidden, then back to the door. "They're not done," he said. Titan shifted his stance. Caleb nodded. "Neither are we." He moved back to the fireplace, adding another piece of wood, watching as the flame caught again. The light returned, stronger now, pushing back the dark. Caleb sat down slowly, but he didn't relax. Not anymore, because something had changed. Not just the house, not just the situation. Him. He wasn't the man in the truck anymore. The one drifting, waiting. He had a position now, a place, a line. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't backing away from it. Morning broke clear and cold. The kind of sky that looked clean from a distance but carried a sharp edge in the air. Frost clung to the porch rail, and the dead orchard beyond shimmered faintly under a thin glaze of ice. Caleb was already outside, working, not pacing, not watching, working. He had stripped the damaged boards from the back door and replaced them with a reinforced beam cut from a fallen post behind the shed. The wood was rough, uneven but solid. It would hold. For now, Titan lay nearby on a folded blanket Caleb had dragged out from the truck. The cut on his shoulder had been cleaned and wrapped, a simple field dressing nothing fancy, but enough. The dog didn't rest easy. Every few seconds, his eyes lifted, scanning the tree line, tracking movement that wasn't there. Or maybe was. Caleb noticed. "You did good," he said, without looking up. Titan's ears flicked. Caleb tightened a bolt with the last of the tools he had. "Better than good," he added quietly. He stood, stretching his back slightly. The work had already started to take its toll, muscles stiff, joints tight from cold and strain. But it felt different, grounded, purposeful. He stepped back, studying the door. Stronger, not permanent, but stronger. "Step 1, he muttered. The sound of an engine cut through the valley again. Different this time, slower, older. Caleb turned immediately, eyes narrowing as he looked toward the road. A pickup truck rolled into the clearing, its tires crunching softly over the frozen ground. Dust rose behind it in thin clouds, catching the sunlight. Not black, not clean, not controlled, just worn. The truck came to a stop a few yards away. The engine idled for a moment, then shut off. A man stepped out. Late 60s, maybe older, broad shoulders despite the years, a face shaped by weather and time, lined but steady. He wore a thick jacket and gloves that looked like they'd seen decades of work. He didn't rush, didn't posture. He just looked at the house, then at Caleb, then at Titan. The dog watched him carefully but didn't growl. That mattered. The man gave a small nod. "You the one who opened it?" he asked. His voice was rough, but not unfriendly. Caleb didn't answer right away. "Depends who's asking," he said. The man walked a few steps closer, stopping short of the porch. "Hank Dalton," he said. "I run the garage down in town." Caleb studied him. Hank didn't look like a threat, didn't move like one either. Still, Caleb stayed cautious. "Caleb Walker," he replied. Hank's eyes shifted briefly to Titan. "That one yours?" "Yeah." Hank nodded slowly. "Good dog," he said. Titan remained still but relaxed just slightly. That mattered too. Hank looked back at the house. "Didn't think I'd see this place open again," he said. Caleb crossed his arms. "You knew it?" Hank let out a short breath. "Everyone around here knew it," he said. "Didn't mean we understood it." He glanced toward the orchard. "People stopped coming out this way a long time ago." Caleb stepped down off the porch, closing some of the distance. "Why?" Hank looked at him for a moment, then shrugged slightly. "Same reason most folks avoid things they can't explain," he said. "And the rest?" He paused. "They had better reasons." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "Northridge," he said. Hank didn't react immediately, but he didn't deny it either. "Word travels," he said quietly. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "It does." A brief silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Measured. Hank gestured lightly toward the house. "You planning to stay?" he asked. Caleb didn't hesitate this time. "Yeah," he said. Hank studied him, then gave a small approving nod. "Then you're gonna need more than that door," he said. Caleb let out a faint breath through his nose. "Figured." Hank turned back toward his truck, reaching into the bed and pulling out a toolbox. "I've got some extra materials," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it'll get you started." Caleb watched him. "You helping me?" he asked. Hank glanced over his shoulder. "Don't mistake it for charity," he said. "I just don't like seeing things left unfinished." Caleb held his gaze for a second, then nodded. "Fair enough." The work began quickly after that. Hank moved with practiced ease, measuring, cutting, reinforcing weak points. Caleb hadn't even noticed yet. He didn't talk much while he worked, but when he did, it was direct, useful. Caleb followed his lead, learning the structure of the house the same way he had learned terrain once before by doing. Titan stayed close, watching, occasionally rising to circle the perimeter before returning again. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then began its slow descent again. By late afternoon, the house looked different. Not fixed, but defended. Boards reinforced, doors secured, weak points identified. Hank stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. "It'll hold for now," he said. Caleb nodded. "Appreciate it." Hank shrugged. "You're not the first one to try something like this," he said. "Just the first one in a long time who might actually finish it." Caleb glanced toward the tree line. "They came back last night," he said. Hank didn't seem surprised. "They will again," he replied. Caleb looked back at him. "I'm not leaving." Hank held his gaze. "I didn't figure you would," he said. A brief pause. Then, "You're gonna need someone who knows the legal side of things," Hank added. "There's a lawyer in town, Rachel Pierce. She doesn't scare easy." Caleb considered that. "All right," he said. Hank nodded. "I'll let her know you're here." He gathered his tools and headed back to the truck. Before getting in, he paused, looked back at the house, at Caleb, at Titan. "Be careful," he said. Not as a warning, as a fact. Then he drove off. The sound of the engine faded into the distance. Silence returned again. But it wasn't empty anymore. Caleb stood there for a moment, taking it in. The house, the work, the direction. Titan moved to his side again. Caleb looked down at him. "We're not alone anymore," he said. Titan's tail shifted once. Caleb nodded. Good, he added, because this time, he wasn't just holding a position, he was building one. The next morning came sharper, clear skies, colder air, and a stillness that felt earned rather than empty. The valley looked different now, not less dangerous, but more defined. Lines had been drawn. Caleb stood at the edge of the orchard, hands in his jacket pockets, watching Titan move through the rows of dead trees. The dog wasn't limping anymore. Not much, still favoring the shoulder slightly but moving with control again, scanning, circling, checking every angle like he had something to protect, which he did. Caleb exhaled slowly. This place isn't dead, he said quietly. Just waiting. Behind him, the sound of a vehicle approached. Not rushed. Not hidden. Expected. Caleb turned. A smaller car, this time dust-covered. Practical. It rolled into the clearing and came to a stop near the house. The driver stepped out quickly, closing the door with purpose. Rachel Pierce, mid-30s, focused eyes, clean lines, like someone who didn't waste movement or words. She carried a leather folder tucked under her arm, already walking toward him, before the engine had fully cooled. You Caleb Walker? She asked. Direct. Caleb nodded once. You Rachel? She gave a quick nod in return. Hank said you'd need someone who knows how to read between the lines, she said. And from what I've heard, there are a lot of lines here. Caleb gestured toward the house. More than I expected. Rachel stepped onto the porch without hesitation, glancing once at the reinforced door before pushing it open. Inside, she stopped, not because she was afraid, because she understood. The maps, the structure, the way everything had been left. This wasn't just a residence, she said quietly. No, Caleb replied. It wasn't. He moved past her, heading toward the wall. Rachel followed, watching carefully as he removed the panel and revealed the hidden compartment again. The case, the documents, the tapes. Rachel crouched down immediately, flipping open the folder and pulling on a pair of thin gloves. You weren't exaggerating, she said. Caleb shook his head. Didn't think I was, he. Rachel began scanning the documents quickly but not carelessly. Her eyes moved fast, but every page she touched stayed in place longer than necessary. Processing. Connecting. Caleb watched her. What do you see? He asked. Rachel didn't answer right away. She flipped another page, then another, then stopped. This, she said, tapping a section with her finger. This is a land transfer record, but it's been altered. Caleb leaned slightly closer. How? Rachel turned the page slightly so he could see. Original boundary lines don't match the final filing, she explained. Whoever filed this shifted ownership without triggering review. Caleb's jaw tightened. Illegal? Rachel glanced up at him. Not if no one notices, she said. Which is the problem? She kept going. Same pattern here, and here, and here. Each document revealed the same thing. Small adjustments, hidden transfers, pieces of land quietly moving under different names. All connected. All deliberate. Rachel leaned back slightly. This isn't isolated, she said. This is systemic. Caleb nodded. That's what Mercer said. Rachel looked at the tapes. You listened to them? Most of it, Caleb replied. Not all. Rachel reached for the labeled cassette. Play it again, she said. Caleb didn't argue. He set the tape into the player and pressed play. Mercer's voice filled the room again. This time, Rachel listened differently, not emotionally. Analytically, she paused the tape at certain points, rewound sections, listened again. Cross-referencing. Caleb stayed quiet. Let her work. Minutes passed. Then, Rachel sat back slowly. This changes everything, she said. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. How? Rachel looked at him directly. Because this isn't just history, she said. It's evidence. Caleb crossed his arms. Evidence of what? Rachel held up one of the documents. Fraud. Coercion. Possibly worse. And not just back then. This ties into current holdings. She pointed toward the name on the page. Northridge didn't stop. They evolved. Caleb's expression didn't change. I figured. Rachel exhaled slowly. With this, she said, gesturing to the case, we can reopen everything. Force review. Force exposure. Caleb glanced toward the door. They won't like that. Rachel gave a faint, humorless smile. They don't have to. A brief silence settled between them. Then Caleb spoke. What's it going to take? Rachel didn't hesitate. Time. Pressure. And the willingness to stand your ground when they push back. Caleb nodded once. That part I can handle. Rachel closed the folder, securing the documents inside. I'll start filing motions today, she said. Once this gets into the system, they won't be able to move quietly anymore. Caleb watched her. You sure about this? Rachel met his gaze. I don't take cases I can't win, she said. And I don't walk away from ones that matter. Titan stepped closer then, resting beside Caleb. Rachel glanced down at him. He's been through it, she said. Caleb nodded. Yeah, we both have. Rachel stood. I'll be back tomorrow, she said, with paperwork, and probably attention. Caleb gave a small nod. Good. Rachel headed for the door, then paused. One more thing, she said, turning slightly. Caleb waited. They're going to try to make this look like it's about the land, she said. It's not. Caleb's expression hardened slightly. I know. Rachel studied him for a second, then nodded. Good, she said. She left without another word. The car started moments later and pulled away. Silence returned again, but this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain. Clear, defined. Caleb stood there, looking at the documents still spread across the table. The maps, the names, the truth. He reached for the final tape, the unlabeled one. Held it in his hand for a moment, then set it down again. Not yet. Because, now. He understood something. This wasn't just about finishing Mercer's story. It was about making sure it didn't disappear again. Caleb stepped toward the window, looking out at the orchard. The trees were still dead, but the ground beneath them wasn't. They buried it deep, he said quietly. Titan stood beside him. Caleb nodded once. Not deep enough. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, quiet changes. The snow melted first, slowly, unevenly revealing patches of dark earth beneath the orchard. The air softened. The wind lost its bite. And for the first time since Caleb had arrived, the valley didn't feel frozen in place. It felt alive. Caleb stood on the porch, hands resting on the worn railing that had been repaired just enough to hold. The house behind him was still far from perfect boards, mismatched, paint uneven, the structure bearing the marks of everything it had endured. But it stood, solid. Titan moved through the yard with steady confidence now. The wound on his shoulder had healed into a thin scar, barely slowing him. He still scanned the perimeter out of habit, but there was no urgency in it anymore. No tension, just awareness. The past few weeks had changed everything. Rachel had done exactly what she said she would. The documents had gone public. The filings had been submitted. And once they were, things started to shift. Quietly at first, then all at once. Northridge didn't come back. Not with threats. Not with offers. Not at all. Instead, there were calls. Inquiries. Questions from places that hadn't been paying attention before. The kind of attention that made things harder to hide. The kind Mercer had hoped for. Hank had stopped by more than once, bringing tools, supplies, and the kind of help that didn't need to be explained. Other people followed, neighbors Caleb hadn't met yet, offering what they could. Not out of obligation, out of recognition. They knew what this place had been, and what it meant now. Caleb hadn't asked for any of it, but he didn't turn it away either. He worked, every day, fixing what he could, reinforcing what mattered. The house became something different under his hands, not restored to what it had been, but rebuilt into what it needed to be. A place that could hold, a place that could last, a place that wouldn't be taken quietly again. The orchard changed too. At first, it didn't look like much, just bare branches against open sky. Then, small signs, buds, faint, almost easy to miss. But there, life where there hadn't been any. Caleb noticed it the morning it happened. He walked out into the rows, Titan at his side, and stopped beside one of the trees. He reached out, touching a branch lightly. Still here, he said quietly. Titan sat beside him, calm. Caleb nodded once. Yeah, he added. You too. Back at the house, the final tape still sat where he had left it. Unlabeled. Untouched. He hadn't needed to play it. Not anymore. Everything Mercer had left behind. The documents. The recordings. The truth. It had already done what it was meant to do. It had been found. Understood. Carried forward. Caleb stepped back onto the porch, lowering himself into the chair he had built from leftover wood. It wasn't perfect, but it held his weight. That was enough. Titan settled down beside him. For a while, neither of them moved. The valley stretched out in front of them, quiet and open. The orchard, the road, the distant line of trees. Nothing rushed. Nothing demanded. It simply existed. Caleb leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle around him. Not the heavy silence from before. Not the kind that pressed in. This one was different. Lighter. Earned. He thought about the truck, the road, the nights that had all felt the same. He thought about the letter. $5. A place no one wanted. He let out a faint breath. Wasn't much to look at, he said. Titan's ear flicked. Caleb smiled slightly. Still isn't. Another quiet moment passed. Then Caleb's gaze drifted toward the house behind him, toward the wall where the case was hidden, toward the space that had held everything. He didn't need to open it again. He didn't need to go back, because what mattered wasn't inside anymore. It was here, in the ground, in the work, in the choice that had been made and held. Caleb leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. He stayed, he said quietly. Titan looked up at him. Caleb nodded. In his way, he added. A faint breeze moved through the orchard, carrying the scent of earth instead of frost. Caleb let it pass over him. Then he spoke again. I guess I did too. No weight in it, no doubt, just truth. Titan shifted closer, resting his head against Caleb's leg. Caleb reached down, resting his hand on the dog's neck. You didn't leave either, he said. Titan stayed still. Caleb's grip tightened just slightly. Never did. The sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. The house stood steady behind them, the orchard stretching out ahead. Not finished. Not perfect, but alive. Caleb leaned back again, eyes on the horizon. For the first time, in a long time, he wasn't looking for the next place to go. He wasn't waiting. He wasn't drifting. He had something now. Not given. Not handed over. Built. Held. Chosen. The house hadn't saved him. It hadn't fixed what had been broken, but it had given him something else. A place to stand. A reason to stay. And in the quiet that followed, that was enough. If you believe some ground is worth standing on, type yes in the comments. I'd like to know who still feels that way. Around here, we believe in holding your line, even when it's not easy. If this story meant something to you, stick around and subscribe. There are more stories like this waiting.